So hello and good evening. Welcome to session 4 of the IJR and Press workshop. Today we'll be talking about publication ethics, which is very important. It is essential to follow ethical guidelines for integrity of research. And as you will learn, there are various committees comprising of international editors, and there's also an international code of conduct to be followed in terms of research. So the first lecture will be by Professor Vikas Agarwal on ethics and publications.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second part of the series, which is much more concerned about the ethics of publication. And so today we will be starting with the what are the regulatory mechanisms are in place for publication ethics. Those who are new or who are planning to write research papers and publish them in peer-reviewed journals should very well be versed with this aspect of publication, because a minor error here and there can create a lot of problems. So we'll try to uh, apprise you of all the issues which are there in international literature regarding publication of a paper and what all needs to be followed. So actually there is no regulatory body or a government agency or an international agency which actually has some kind of a regulation over the ethics of publication. However, there are certain guiding publication ethics bodies which provide recommendations from time to time regarding various aspects of publication ethics, which may be followed, or rather, which should be followed. And in fact, most of the international journals, their editors, and the peer reviewers, they follow this. The one which is widely respected, regarded, and followed is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. There are similar such agencies like Committee on Publication Ethics or World Association of Medical Editors. And even for open access publishing, nowadays there are very strict, stringent ethical guidelines which are proposed by Open Access Scholarly Publishing Association. Now, I'll be briefly touching upon the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors recommendations. A brief word about this ICMJE. What is it? It's a small group of general medical editors, medical journal editors, and representatives of selected related organizations who are working together to improve the quality of medical science and its reporting. It meets annually. It refines its recommendations for the conduct, reporting, editing, and publication of the scholarly work in the medical journals. And this is the most widely accepted recommendations followed word over by most of the scientific journals as of today. The purpose of the recommendations of ICMJE are to review the best practice and the ethical standards in the conduct of the research and its reporting, and also the other material which is published in medical journals. These could be even advertisements. It helps authors, editors, and even others who are involved in peer review process, like peer reviewers, to create and distribute accurate, clear, reproducible, unbiased information to the medical journals. It provides very useful insights into medical editing and publishing process for the media also, which can be also accepted by patients and their families, and the general readers of those journals or through media. So actually, who are the sort of stakeholders for these recommendations? It is generally meant in detail for the authors, but they are useful for even editors, peer reviewers, and all the people who are involved in the process of publishing a biomedical journal. So basically, it's a very lengthy recommendation which is put forth by ICMJE in 2017 last. So recommendations are very clear and very elaborate upon defining the role of the authors and the contributors, disclosure of financial and non-financial relationships and activities, and therefore conflicts of interest, responsibilities in the submission and the peer review process. It clearly defines what is the role or the should be the recommendations or the ethics of journal owners and the editorial freedom. Also, it provides guidelines for protection of research participants. It provides general recommendations for editorial issues related to publication in the journal, like corrections, retractions, republications, scientific misconduct, expressions of concern, or retraction of an article. It provides recommendations for copyright, overlapping publications, and also for encouraging correspondence fee, which is charged by the open access journals. It provides recommendations for supplements, theme issues, and special series. It also provides recommendations for sponsorship or partnership for journals which are only publishing in electronic media. It provides recommendations, and also it provides recommendations for advertising and the relationship between the journal editors, journals, and the media person for promotion of an article or the journal itself, and also certain recommendations for journals to the concept, design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work, drafting of the work, or revising it critically for important intellectual content, final approval of the version, and agreement to be accountable for all the aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity, if they arise later on any part of the work, are appropriately investigated, resolved, and replied by the person. Journal provide generally recommendations clearly who could be an author and what is their contribution. So journal generally provide in contents for author or information for authors that what all needs to be required to be criteria to be fulfilling the authorship. So you must see in which journal you are submitting a paper, whether you are fulfilling the criteria as per the journal standards or not. Journals have a responsibility to investigate any complaint which is received regarding the authorship, because this is the most common sort of conflict of interest which arises in medical science as of today. The journal editors and the reviewers have a responsibility not to covet an authorship of an article which has been submitted to their journal or which has reached a peer review. There are instances when peer reviewer has asked the author to make him one of the author so that he can give favorable comments for that review process and paper may be accepted. This should not be done. It ensures that all the modifications to the author list after publication are justifiable. And if so, then it can issue a correction. Many times authors say that one or two authors have been missed or the names have been having some kind of a typographical error. So these can be corrected as an erratum later on in the subsequent issues of the journal. So journal should encourage authors to disclose their contributions under different subheadings, as has been listed here, whether they have provided substantial contribution to the concept or design of the work, or acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data, drafting of the work, or revising it critically for important intellectual content, final approval of the version to be published, and agreement to hold for integrity of the research material provided. So this is basically based on ICMJE guidelines for authorship criteria. And in fact, most of the journals as of today are following this and are asking you when you are actually sending a paper to the journal to disclose who has performed what role. Now, people who do not fulfill all the criteria for authorship but have contributed in the research work, they can be listed as contributors. So that is how it should be. Though there is controversy, some of the authors may not agree, but then it is left best to the authors to decide amongst themselves so that later on a conflict should not arise. Now, many times we do acknowledge people or other uh, societies or bodies. You can do so to acknowledge them, but please do review whether this person qualifies to be an uh, person who can be acknowledged. And if it is an individual, it is always good to get a prior acknowledgement approval from that person so that later on some or the other controversy may not arise. There are many other responsibilities of the authors which will be discussed by subsequently by the speakers Chengappa, and then Latika will be talking about predatory journals, and then Dr. Subhash will be talking about informed consent and scientific misconduct being discussed in detail by Dr. Ashish today. Then there are clear-cut responsibilities of the editors and the journal staff. If editors have some or the other kind of a conflict of interest, they should recuse themselves from editorial decisions, and they should clearly disclose it as conflict of interest so that other editors or associate editors may take up that responsibility. Similarly, peer reviewers who are actually having some kind of a conflict of interest should disclose that and should recuse themselves from doing the peer review process of that particular article. For the editorial staff, it is important that they must not use information gained through working with the manuscripts for their own private gain. And editors are encouraged to regularly publish or disclose statements about potential conflict, their own potential conflicts of interest, as well as their staff's potential conflict of interest. For a supplement issue, when you invite a guest editor, he is also liable to have same kind of norms, nothing different. Then ICMJE clearly provides responsibilities in the submission and the peer review process, defining the authorship principles, as I have told earlier, a declaration of conflict of interest. This will be discussed in detail subsequently, but this is most important part of a submission process while you are publishing an article in a journal. And also Latika will be discussing how to identify predatory or pseudo journals so that your valuable hard labor should not go waste. Journals have a ethics or a recommendation to maintain the confidentiality of the material which they are reviewing, to do their job in fixed timelines. The peer reviewers are also expected to maintain the confidentiality and complete the process in the given timelines. So many times we do see, we take it for granted that we can do a very late uh, peer reviewing evaluation of a manuscript. It is generally not healthy. Unless you have some pressing reasons, you can delay it, but you should ask permission from the editor that I'm going to delay it. Otherwise, you say no, that I cannot do the uh, evaluation of the manuscript in the given timelines. And you maintain the integrity. If any peer reviewer has any kind of a conflict of interest, he should disclose it and should recuse himself or herself from doing the peer review process. Then there are concerns. It very clearly gives the journal owners have a power to remove an editor, but they cannot fringe upon the uh, independence of the editor. Editor is independent. He has got the final say in reviewing and in publishing whatever he feels is ethically correct in the scientific journal. ICMJE provides recommendations for protection of research participants, and they very well encourage, whenever you are publishing a human data, it always asks for that the study was conducted as per the principles of Helsinki Declaration, and this has been revised in 2013, and those who are interested in details of it can go on to the website in the link provided here and can update themselves about it. Briefly, I will be touching upon the ethics of publishing and the editorial issues which come up during the process of publication, like corrections, retractions, republications, and version control. If there is any doubt about the veracity of the publication at any level, or if there is some kind of a conflict of interest, generally it is most commonly it is the authorships. One needs to restore to some of these issues. Either you may retract the article, or you can put an expression of concern, or you can put in a correction. I'll be briefly touching upon these three aspects just to make you a bit clear about it. What is a retraction? Retraction is removing the article from the publication. And this should be considered if there is a clear evidence that findings are unreliable, either as a result of misconduct like data fabrication, or there is an honest error and there has been some kind of a miscalculation or an experimental error, or the findings have previously been published elsewhere without proper cross-referencing, permission, or justification. Generally, it is seen in cases of redundant publication, or there is some kind of a plagiarism which has been reported or pointed out later, or it reports some kind of unethical research which comes up after the publication. Then the article can be retracted. Retractions are generally not appropriate if there is a change in the authorship and there is no reason to doubt the validity of the findings of the uh, results presented in the papers. It can be put in as a correction. Now, expression of concern. Journal editors generally consider issuing an expression of concern if they receive inconclusive evidence of research or publication misconduct by the authors or by somebody else. There is evidence that findings are unreliable, but author's institution or the lab will not investigate the case, or if it is believed that an investigation into an alleged misconduct related to the publication will not be fair or impartial or conclusive, or if there is an investigation which is ongoing but a judgment has not been reached or a final conclusion has not been reached, the journal editors can issue an expression of concern. Also, an expression if there is a small portion of an otherwise reliable publication proves to be incorrect or misleading because of some genuine, honest error, which can always happen, it can be corrected, whether it is pointed out by somebody else or by authors themselves, then it can be put as erratum in the subsequent issues of the journal. Or if there is some problem with the author or the contributor list and it needs to be corrected, then it can be put in as a correction. So there are three different aspects: retraction, removing of the article, expression of concern. When in doubt, just put a sort of a doubtful value of that paper till the final judgment is reached. And correction, you just put in a erratum so that the reader subsequently can correct themselves whatever misleading or an error information was there in the original article. Now, there are certain guidelines for notice of retraction. This is important. Generally, it should be linked to the retracted article wherever possible in all forms, including electronic versions. It should clearly identify the retracted article, clearly identified as a retraction, and should be published promptly to minimize harmful effects from misleading publications, and should be freely available to all the readers. It may happen that the original article is only available to the people who are having subscription of the journal, but retraction notice should be available free of cost to everyone. And it should also be stated in during the process of retraction who is retracting it, whether authors have themselves asked or the journal is retracting the article. And also, very importantly, what is the reason that this article is being retracted? Generally, editors are professionals. They put very professional language while retracting the articles, but any defamatory or libelous statement should not be provided. Now, there are certain aspects of misconduct like duplicate public submission or publication, which will be dealt with subsequently. I will be just only putting forth some observations regarding the acceptable secondary publication. If a study has been conducted and it can be published in two different formats or on two different aspects, then it is acceptable secondary publication. The only thing is that the primary publication should always be referred to. And when you are submitting the article to the journal, in the covering letter, it should be very clearly stated that the original version was published in so and so journal, and this is a secondary version of this particular paper which I am submitting to your journal. Once you are clear in stating that, generally you don't fall into any kind of a conflict later on. Like it may happen that you have done a study for say some biomarker and clinical features, and in the end you notice that the clinical features are conveying at one paper and the biomarker can be in another paper. It can be considered for acceptable secondary publication from the same data set. It is coming from the same data set, but it should not be that you have done the three biomarkers and you publish three different papers naming one biomarker for each paper from that same data set. This is not acceptable. So I've clearly stated this. Once you are mentioning all this information in your covering letter to the editor, I think you are safe and sound, and it will help in making the editors take a decision. Now, editors are generally advised to encourage correspondence, because when people write letters, they put forth some questions which needs to be answered by the authors. So this two-way communication should be encouraged. Journals should very clearly and very transparently provide the charges of publication, per page publication charge or charges of color pages, or the entire article charge. It should be very clearly stated. It should be stated at a place where it is very easy for the potential authors to see it, so that they can make up their mind before submitting their manuscripts for review. The supplements, theme issues, or special series, they are abide by the same principles as for a regular issue. Now, sponsorship or partnership can be okay, but it should not compromise on the editorial independence. Nowadays, many journals are only published electronically, but they should have a permanent preservation of journal articles on a journal's website or an independent archive or a credible repository so that the historical record are maintained. Generally, journals can go for advertising, but the policy regarding advertising should be very clear, explicit, and there should be written policies for advertising under the, and these all the guidelines for advertising should be under the strict control of the editors. They should have their final say in advertising, putting forth the advertisement in their journals. Then something about the role of journals and the media. Journals do encourage the dissemination of published articles in their journal, but it should not be a preprint or during the process of submission only that media should be encouraged to discuss those articles. Unless it is coming out in the print, generally the article should not be discussed. And this should be very clear to the authors also. Though the authors may have presented their work in some conferences earlier, they can discuss whatever they have presented in the conferences, but not something beyond that. Lastly, there is very clear guideline that all the clinical trials which are going to be published in any journal should have a registration. And generally, it is for Indian studies, Indian clinical trials, it is the Clinical Trial Registry of India, whereas internationally you have clinicaltrials.gov. Most of the ICMJE member guide journals, they follow a concept of data sharing so that if required, the data can be shared by the amongst the authors or the person who is requesting it from the author of the original article, and this is encouraged so that valuable information can be sort of shared by potential researchers all over the world. So this is just to give you a very general, very brief, concise review of publication ethics and their regulations. If you really ask me, I'll say that the regulation is at the level of own individual self, be it author, be it editor, be it peer reviewer, or be it the person who are involved in the process of publication. If you are honest to yourself, then the chances of having some kind of a conflict or some kind of a scientific misconduct later on comes very late or should not happen. So with this, I will conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Agarwal. Now we'll move on to authorship do's and don'ts and copyright issues, which will be talked about by Dr. Chengappa.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, sir. Yeah, sir has in fact made my work a lot more easier. He has talked about so many terms that are going to crop up here, like plagiarism, like maybe salami publication and stuff like that, and retractions. So let us principally understand who an author is, what is an author's responsibility, what are author rights, and finally end with talking about the copyright issues in scholarly publishing. So we will be discussing about authorship, as I already told. We'll try to understand how the concept of authorship has evolved over time. And then what are the definitions, who is an author, who is not an author, what are the different types of authors. And then we'll look at the loopholes in this definition Obviously, it's not a perfect definition, but it is working well as of now. And then we'll discuss some of the copyright issues, understand what a copyright is, how to not fall into the trap of uh, copyright violation, and we'll summarize our data. So as Vikas sir told, all of us are responsible while we publish. The author, the editor, the peer reviewer, the publisher, everyone are responsible, and we have to be honest to ourselves. So I'm sure all of us have played hide and seek. If the person who is catching, he does not count till 20, he skips 10, after 10 he goes to 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So that is cheating. But his friends know that he won't do that. That's why they are going to hide. So he has to be, so our catcher has to be maintain his integrity, and the other players should not cross the boundaries and go elsewhere to hide. So all of them have to be really honest to themselves while playing this, and there's no monitor, there's no umpire here like in cricket or other sports. So precisely this is how all of us should be while writing a scientific work. So let us see why authorship is important. So authorship is important because when somebody is named as an author, it means that we are giving due credit to that person's work. And also, it also means that we are assigning responsibility to the about that work. Whatever is written, he is the author's responsibility. So this is important in academia, especially for growth, for career growth in an academic institute or as a scientist, or in a social, when you meet amongst your friends in a conference, if you have, and now we have all these author profiles where you can show off some of your publications. Then financial, especially when you have done some work and you have given credit as an author, you can extend the work by means of applying for grants, by means of applying for sponsorship elsewhere. So only if you have a backup of something that is reflected in your authorship credentials, only then will you be able to do all these things and get these aids. So to make it short, authorship is important because it gives accountability for the published work, as well as it gives credit to the person who has done it. So there are some desirable attributes, like in life, one has to be honest, one has to be accurate about what is he or she is reporting, one has to be efficient. Just because these kids can go and hide anywhere, they can't cross their boundary, they have made their own boundaries. So you have to be efficient, you have to use your resources in a proper way and try to put out a good work in the resources that is possible. And finally, one has to be very objective. You have to just put out the results that you have got and not extrapolate it to measures that can mean something else. So then this is so simple. All of us know that these are, most of us have learned about all these credentials in all our moral science classes. But why is it difficult? So it is problem because scientific research is expanding, and there's a concept of publish or perish, especially in academia. All of them are pressurized to keep churning out papers, which is not possible. If you want a good quality paper, you'll have to wait, and it comes slowly. And research performance needs to be analyzed. It's not just you publish. Now people start asking you, where have you published, what is the impact factor of the journal, what is the citation rate, what is the H index, this. So all this actually brings in a lot of stress to a young researcher, at least. And then you tend to take some of those shortcuts and get into trouble later on. So what happens if one cheats? It's simple. You can just mix up some numbers and publish it. And what happens? If found out, there will be retraction. And retraction, if the editorial board does it with the proper, as sir told, with the proper message saying that it was retracted for so reason, then there's a big black mark in your career. And most of the journals may not actually receive or accept your publications from there now. Moreover, most of the journals are run by some of the publishing groups. Major journals are run by maybe 5-6 publishing group houses. So it will be circulated across all journals, and you as an author may find it difficult to publish in all those journals. So overall, when we see authorship issues causes retraction, leads to retraction in about 6 to 8% of the retractions. So when they saw for about 17,000 retractions, what they found is main concerns regarding authorship was seen in about 400, and forged authorship was also seen in about 300. So adding on to about 800 cases of authorship issues that had led to retractions. What is alarming is that all these retractions, majority of them are happening in Asia. By Asia, I don't mean India alone. There are other countries, but majority of them are happening in Asia. That may be also because we have there is a lot of the population in Asia is more, the pressure is more, all those things. But we have to be careful that Asia is already under a scanner, and we can't afford to do more mistakes. So when we look at authorship misconducts, it is actually not new. Even William Shakespeare has been considered as one of the greatest literary giants. Even his work is found to be plagiarized by a 15th century from a 15th century poet. So this has come up because now there are very powerful softwares to catch plagiarism. So before, it might have been easier to evade some misconduct or retraction, but now getting caught is really, the chances are really high. So when in a plus one paper, when they saw about 12,772 papers, when they analyzed, they found that approximately 48% of the co-authors did not fulfill the authorship criteria. At that time, it was not very strict, but now it is becoming very strict that all the people who are listed as authors satisfy the authorship criteria, which sir has told, and I'll be repeating it again. So to summarize, retractions just is a tip of the iceberg, and authorship criteria not being fulfilled or fabrication of data is actually still going on, and we have to be extra careful as authors to avoid this. So authorship has started off in the definition of authorship has started off in 1978, where the ICMJE required a statement confirming that all authors have seen and agreed upon the manuscript. Later on, the three authorship criteria mentioned in 1988 and the collective authorship and also acknowledgement for other contributors started in 1988. In 1994, order of authorship became important, who is the first author, second author, and so on. And in 2004, emphasis on author contributions or guarantor of paper, now also known as the corresponding author, became mandatory. And in 2013, the 4 authorship criteria came into place. So what are the 4 authorship criteria? Who is an appropriate author? So to become an author, one should have either contributed for the conception or design of the study, or in the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. And all of them should be involved in drafting or revising the intellectual content or the manuscript. And before publication, all of them should have read it and approved the final version. Once it is published, all the authors have to be accountable for all the aspects of the work. It's not that I have only done experimental work and he has only done clinical work and I can't be responsible for clinical work. That does not work. All the authors are responsible for all of the content in the manuscript. So anybody who satisfies all the 4 criteria are only known as authors. Anybody else who does not satisfy either at least one of this can be acknowledged, but they should not be shown as authors. So then there are issues of inappropriate authorship. So who is an inappropriate author? Anybody who do not satisfy all the 4 criteria becomes an inappropriate author. So the first type of inappropriate authorship is called guest authorship. Then there is something called ghost authorship, and a gift authorship. So guest authorship, who are they? So we have written a paper now and we want some big name in it. So we talk to a friend who is somewhere else in the world or somewhere else in India. So we ask him, can you be a co-author? He says, okay, very well. Then he becomes a guest author. He or she has not done any type of work. But why do people do this? People do this because if there is a big name in your manuscript, the chances of publications is perceived to be high, which is not true actually. And then comes the gift authorship. It's easy. We gift authorship to someone, usually the seniors or department chairs or administrators or colleagues or spouse or kinship. So here it's not a very difficult thing to guess why this is done. It is usually done to get back favor or not to fall in bad books of your seniors or others. And then there's a ghost author. Here, somebody has done all the work, but then when the manuscript comes out, that individual's name is not there. So the person becomes a ghost. Because the colleagues are too junior, usually they are left out, or to avoid conflict of interest, especially in industry sponsored trials. So the better way some of them are arguing is we have to attribute the work done by each author in a journal. So we just say that this person has done the laboratory work, this person has done the statistical work, and so on. Because now papers are getting bigger, the data is becoming bigger. It's impossible for one person to handle the whole thing. So that could be another way of showing authorship, but it is still not in vogue. And people who do not satisfy the authorship criteria, suppose somebody has